Location is interesting. Location is something that people keep telling me is incredibly important. Okay, like location is arguably the most important thing in a lot of different areas of life. Okay, my wife and I, we rent an apartment right now, which is cool. Renting's fine. I don't mind it. I don't have to pay to get the AC fixed when it goes out or anything like that. It's a flat rate. Like I know what I'm paying every month. It's nice. It's nice. But eventually, my wife and I, we would like to buy a home. We like to own a house, you know, all that fun stuff. And whenever it comes to looking for a house, people keep telling me that whenever the time comes, that when you buy a house, the most important thing is location. You can paint the walls, you can tear a wall down if you want, you can update the appliances, you can add on to the house even if you have the means and you want to do that. Right. So, but here's the thing though, when you buy a house, if it's in, the projects, you can't pick it up and put it on the beach. You can't do that. Right? So location is very important when you buy a house. When you're born, location is everything. I popped out in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Could have been better. Seriously, like it could have been. Like it would have been nice to pop out in like Beverly Hills, be a trust fund baby. That sounds really nice. But no, instead, I popped out in Arkadelphia. I've been cursed with this Arkansas Razorback fandom where we're just bad every year. It's terrible. Okay, but wouldn't trade it for anything. Learned how to persevere throughout my life because I'm not a trust fund baby or anything like that. So it's all good. Have great parents, all that great stuff. But when it comes to location, it could have been worse. I could have been born in anywhere that's not America. Location is important. It's an important aspect in just about everything that happens in our lives. And when it comes to professional athletes, location is important because where you're drafted is the exact same thing. Where you go is everything. Now, when we think about this concept, it's not new. Okay, plenty of people have had this opinion before. Where you get drafted really matters. It's sometimes more important than how talented you are. Obviously, there are some players who are so talented that they can just, overcome whatever terrible organization that they wind up with, like Michael Jordan when he went to the Bulls. Horrendously bad organization. But he was so great that he overcame it and they won 6 titles. Now, whenever we think of this concept, that's often what we think of. We think of players like Matthew Stafford, Barry Sanders, and just a full list of other former Lions players that were good that couldn't overcome how awful that organization was. Obviously, they're in a much better place now, but potentially going to win the Super Bowl, could potentially win the NFC and all of those things. But I believe that this concept extends beyond great players on bad teams. This concept also seeps into depth and playing time. Okay, for example, when we look at the Miami Heat, right, in those prime years where it's the Heatles and it's LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh, if you go to Basketball Reference and you look at their field goal attempts per game, it was the lowest number that they averaged in the prime of their careers, which makes sense, right? Because all 3 of those guys are playing together, and LeBron James has to sacrifice shots so that Dwayne Wade can take some, and Dwayne Wade is sacrificing shots so that Chris Bosh can take some. And then Ray Allen shows up, and they're like, oh, we should probably let that guy shoot a bunch of threes, so we're going to have to give up even more shots. It's part of it. When you go to a team that has depth and other talent, it impacts your numbers. It impacts the stats that you post because you're having to share reps more. In basketball, you're having to share shots. And in the NFL, this same concept of the more talented people that you play with, the less playing time you get is true, especially when it comes to defensive linemen. Now, I say all of that because I've gotten some pushback on my defenses of Kwity Paye and Dio Dangbo, which is fine. You're allowed to be wrong. You are. Kwity Paye, Dio Dangbo are both good players that are victims of this Colts organization in a different way than you're probably thinking. Now, for context, here are Kwity Paye's numbers from last year. He recorded 52 tackles, a career high, 17 pressures, 8.5 sacks, a career high, in 16 games and 702 snaps played. Dayo Dangbo, 38 tackles last year, 22 pressures, 8 sacks, a career high, in 17 games and 622 snaps played. I lay all that out to now tell you about the leading pass rushers, the leading sack getters in the NFL this previous season. TJ Watt had just a dominant year last year. Best pass rusher in the NFL has been for the past couple years. He logged 68 tackles, 50 pressures, and 19 sacks in 17 games. Here's the kicker, though. He played 935 snaps. That is 233 more than Kwity Paye and 313 more than Dayo Odeyingbo. I would hope that he has better counting stats than Kwity Paye and Dayo Odeyingbo if he's playing that many more snaps than those guys. Josh Allen, edge rusher for the Jacksonville Jaguars, same thing. 66 tackles last year, 46 pressures, 17 and a half sacks in 17 games. And he played 880 snaps. That's 178 more snaps than Kwity Paye and 258 more snaps than Dayo Odeyingbo. Now, for reference on this snap count thing, a team runs on average about 60 plays a game on each side of the ball. So I'll let you do the math on basically how many more full games TJ Watt and Josh Allen were on the field for compared to Kwity Paye and Dayo Odeyingbo. Moving on to Khalil Mack, who falls in the same boat here. 74 tackles. That's a lot for an edge rusher. 36 pressures and 17 sacks in 17 games. And he played 934 snaps. That's 232 more than Kwity Paye and 312 more than Dayo Odeyingbo. Of course, his numbers are better. Now, I am not insinuating that Kwity Paye or Dayo Odeyingbo are better than any of the players that I just listed. But here's the thing. If Kwity Paye and Dayo Odeyingbo had been drafted by teams with less talent on the defensive line, they would be double-digit sack guys. They would be. If Kwity Paye had played for the Tennessee Titans last year, who didn't have a ton of depth on their defensive line, okay, the year that Kwity Paye was drafted, he was taken 21st overall by the Colts. With the 22nd pick, the Tennessee Titans took a defensive back. But if the Colts had passed on him and the Titans had taken him at 22, he'd have had 10-plus sacks last year because he would have played a lot more. And all the Chris Ballard haters out there would be complaining like, why didn't they take Kwity Paye? Seriously, where you go matters, especially if you're a defensive lineman, because the more talent you have on the defensive line, the less snaps these guys play. If Dayo Odeyingbo and Kwity Paye both played an extra 200 snaps, which isn't that many, if they each played an extra 200 snaps, that still would have been less than TJ Watt played last year, and it would have been less than what Khalil Mack played last year. And it would have been around the same number of snaps that Josh Allen played last year for the Jaguars. If they each played an extra 200 snaps, they would be double-digit sack guys. They would be. And if all those players that I just listed, some of the best pass rushers in the NFL, Josh Allen, Khalil Mack, and TJ Watt, if they had played 200 less snaps, their numbers wouldn't have been as good. They wouldn't have been. You could argue, and I'm going to, that Chris Ballard has done such a good job at drafting and acquiring talent on the defensive line that it hurts him. Okay, he's got so many guys, 8 deep. That's what Gus Bradley said at the Colts' most recent press conference after training camp. 8 guys deep. When you're going 8 deep, you're rotating guys in and out. And because of that, it's hard to be a double-digit sack guy. It really is. And so we can sit here and we can complain about, oh, the Colts didn't have any double-digit sack guys. Chris Ballard's not that good at drafting defensive linemen. Isn't that supposed to be kind of his thing? Even though the Colts were tied for 3rd in the NFL last year in sacks. But yeah, you're right. Chris Ballard can't draft defensive linemen. Once again, Chris Ballard, when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, is simply a victim of his own drafting ability. Okay, he has done an excellent job over these past few years he definitely did last year, of acquiring talent on the defensive line that can get after the quarterback. And if he wasn't as good at it, then Kwity Paye and Daiwa Dangbo, they'd be double-digit sack dudes, and we'd be like, oh, we got some dudes. Okay, whatever. The only thing that Chris Ballard has done wrong during his tenure here in Indianapolis is it took him too long to find a replacement for Andrew Luck. And I don't even know if that was a mistake. Once again, Chris Ballard, a victim of his own drafting ability. So we all know about Andrew Luck, retired 5 years ago, just on a whim. We're stuck with a year of Jacoby Brissett. Okay, the Colts go 7-9. Do you know how hard it is to win 7 games when you're playing with a backup quarterback? Like you have to have a good coach, and you have to have other players on the roster that help elevate that quarterback to win that many games. And so they walk into the 2020 NFL draft, and we're like, I wonder who they're going to draft. They've got the 13th pick. They trade out of it. Okay, they trade out of it, and I don't blame them because all the quarterbacks that were good that year had all already been drafted. Justin Herbert was off the board. Tua was off the board. Joe Burrow was off the board. They were like there was no quarterback left for them to grab. And so they traded down. It's like, well, why didn't they trade up? You really think that the Chargers, Dolphins, or the Bengals were really going to trade out of the 1st, 5th, or 6th pick to have the 13th and miss out on a potential franchise quarterback? That wasn't going to happen. It's like, okay, what about 2021? Well, in 2021, Colts went 11-5, and they had the 21st pick, and they took a guy in Kwity Paye that was good last year. Would have been better if there weren't so many good defensive linemen on this Colts roster, and he played closer to 900 snaps. Right? He goes out, he grabs Phillip Rivers. They make the playoffs, and they were a good football team. And then 2022 comes around, and the Colts once again have a pretty mediocre year. They have literally the 16th pick in the draft. And what'd they do? They traded out of it. And it's like, oh, like, why didn't they trade up? Why didn't they try to grab a good quarterback? There wasn't a good quarterback here. It wasn't. The only quarterback that got selected was Kenny Pickett in the first round. He went 20th, and he's now a backup. So in 2020, there wasn't a quarterback on the board for them to take to look to replace Andrew Luck. So he goes out, he gets Phillip Rivers. They go 11-5. Right? And so now you're picking 21st. There's not going to be a franchise quarterback sitting there waiting on you when you're at pick number 21. And look, you really think you're going to trade up with the Jaguars, go from 21-1 and draft Trevor Lawrence? No way. You think you're going to trade all the way up to 3? I'm glad they didn't, because guess who went number 3 that year? Trey Lance. He's pretty good, being the backup quarterback to Dak Prescott. Or they could have traded up to number 2. Oh, yeah, so they could take Zach Wilson? Come on now. There wasn't a true opportunity for Chris Ballard to draft a legitimate replacement for Andrew Luck until 2023. When they were bad the year prior, they had the 4th overall pick, and they took a guy in Anthony Richardson who was the best quarterback available at that point. He was. He's going to be better than Will Levis, a guy who completed 57% of his passes last year in 9 games. Chris Ballard has done a good job as the general manager of the Colts. You can tell me, well, the wins aren't there and all that stuff. And you're right. The wins haven't been there. They haven't won a division. They haven't, hosted a home playoff game. They haven't done anything like that. But it's not his fault that Andrew Luck randomly retired. Seriously, it wasn't. And you can go back, you can find a podcast where T.Y. Hilton said that year was the year that they thought they were really going to get over the hump. And then Andrew Luck was like, nah, I'm out. That's not on Chris Ballard. Okay, and he has continued to push through that and to put semi-competitive teams on the field. Okay, one of the things that really bothers me is when I interact with Colts fans, they act like this team was bad last year. If Gardner Minshew makes a throw, an easy throw, to a backup running back, which, according to a lot of Colts fans, that's on Shane Steichen. It should have been Jonathan Taylor on the field, so it's not really Chris Ballard's fault. But if he just makes a throw, they win the division, and then they play the Browns in the first round, and we saw how awful Joe Flacco was in that game. It's not on Chris Ballard, man. It's really not. So Chris Ballard, I like him. I think he's done a good job. Okay, given the cards that he was dealt, and if he was worse at drafting and if he was worse at acquiring talent, this rebuild probably would have happened a little bit quicker. But no, he's been able to figure out ways to put enough talent on the field for the Colts to at least be mediocre despite having below average quarterback play, which is not easy to do because you don't win games in this league, especially close games against good teams, unless you have a legitimate option at the quarterback position. And the Colts haven't had that. Now they do. So I think the Colts are going to have a good year this year. I'm excited to see what Anthony Richardson brings to the table.